Welcome. Nice to see such a nice full room for Mark, not just a colleague but an old friend. I'm going to just do his official biography here, although this doesn't, believe me, it does not cover it. Mark's firm, Macek, a furniture company, designed and built furniture since 1995. His company specializes in custom-made projects for residences, businesses, schools, and religious institutions. He earned a B.Arch from the University of Texas at Austin. I remember his second year. Afterwards, apprenticed for master craftsman Louis Fry. Macek Furniture Company launched production lines at the International Contemporary Furniture Fair in 2005 and 6. He's built furniture in collaboration with Anderson Wise Architects, Larry Speck, Page, Miro Rivera, Ultra Studio, Pollen Architects, Furman Kiel, Paul Lamb, Gensler, the Dutch artist Martin Bass, and the National Football League.
Wow.
NFL's very own furniture partner. He's also done some work for me, which isn't on your list. Strategically left off. Mark's participated in group design exhibits in the Liban, at Gallery Lombardi, at Design Within Reach and Cloud Tree Studios. He's a member of the Guild of Austin Artisans, and he's taught woodworking and furniture design at the School of Architecture since 2006, which is probably mostly how you know him. It says here, I take it you wrote this, he's grateful for every day that he teaches. So, Mark, welcome and thank you so much. This is your second or maybe third? Second forum. Thank you so much.
And what is this little thing?
Not yet.
I'm trying. Is that it? Okay. I am hoping to publish a book about the student furniture from the wood design class. Hopefully with the Center American Architecture and Design right here. I've admired the students' skills and designs for 11 years. The book would be intended primarily as a design book, with all respect due to the individual projects. I also have an obligation to describe what the wood design course does and to shed light on what the students have accomplished in one semester of woodworking. The images are a slideshow of the final projects. There are more photos here probably than a book has space for, and this archive is still growing. It includes about 2/3 of the intended projects right now. And what I see first are, okay, so I guess the automatic advance isn't working. No, I did that. What I see first are the quality of craft, the facility with the vocabulary of design, and the diversity of ideas. Can you just press this every 11 seconds or so? Most of the furniture fits into typologies such as chair, table, and cabinet or case good. But the range of expression within these types is extraordinary, as I hope you'll see. I had not had time to credit each project on the slideshow, but I will. I'm not going to discuss the projects individually or describe the course just yet. First, I'll describe the concept of embodied cognition. And then I'll go through some ideas from craft theory that might relate to this, and then relate that back to the class. In embodied cognition, the way you use your body changes the way that you think. There is a classical view of cognition, reinforced by some schools of empiricism and positivism, that the mind is separate from the body. Not the brain, which is clearly attached, but the mind, the operations of consciousness and cognition. In the classical view, our sensory and motor systems are merely peripheral input devices to the mind, which can operate on its own ideal terms. Terms that are more abstract and more true than the senses. from this point of view, experience is just data, and the mind contemplates higher things. There's a hint of human exceptionalism here. Made in God's image, human consciousness must somehow be superior to the body, which resembles an animal's body in so many ways. Each of us uses knowledge every day that cannot be learned verbally or communicated to anyone else. The mind isn't separate from the body because we're living organisms. In this view, cognition is embodied. One example of embodied cognition is facial recognition. I can probably recognize almost everybody in this room after seeing you once or twice, even though I could probably never tell somebody else what one of you looks like well enough for them to recognize you without seeing you first. Another example would be driving a car. You don't have to think about it because you've already learned how to do this. And your body and your mind do this together. Another example is talking. Another example is listening. Perception, from this point of view, perception is not something that happens to us. It's something that we do. We know more than we can ever say. Our brains have evolved in this vehicle with these capacities. People are terrestrial creatures operating within this range of the electromagnetic spectrum, and we are really good at this. Our science has evolved too. Science no longer confuses the concepts of mind and soul. It's okay for your mind to be embodied. Your soul is another matter. And we are comfortable admitting that we have more in common with the rest of life on Earth than we used to admit. An architect or a craftsperson would probably agree with this version of cognition. I don't really know how much the term embodied cognition is used in the School of Architecture. It might be taught more than I realize. This idea is also known as situated knowledge. The mind is situated in the human body. It's contextual by nature. It's also known as tacit knowledge, understood even though it cannot be explained. Embodied knowledge is how beginning design is taught the whole world over, based on the learning by doing exercises at Itten and Albers at the Bauhaus. Students interact directly with color, shape, shadow, line, texture, and blank space. Heidegger famously said that we know a hammer not by staring at it, but by using it. And when hammering, the hammer eventually disappears as a separate object and becomes a part of the mind. And as designers, we relate to that. Thinking is bound up with action, and Heidegger began to acknowledge the situated character of cognition. In the 1950s, chemist and philosopher Michael Polanyi refuted the idea that the scientific method could ever yield truth mechanically. Scientific method is not a discovery machine. The practice of science depends on individual scientists making personal commitments and personal judgments. At the same time, these individuals are cooperating as members of a closely knit organization of fellow scientists discovering and influencing each other, discussing and influencing each other. And the results are often unpremeditated. Polanyi denied that the mind was reducible to a collection of rules. It does not operate like a computer. For Polanyi, any claim to knowledge by science or any other rules is personal and committed. We are invested. Polanyi identified what he called tacit knowledge as his most important discovery. In the book The Hidden Dimension, Edward T. Hall revealed the results of years of studies showing that people act upon corporeal information that they don't even have to be aware of. Every human body has a spatial bubble, a personal space around it, that acts almost like a force field. The bubble changes in intensity the closer you get to the body. If you walk into a crowded elevator and don't turn around, you'll see people move out of your way, even though you're no closer to them than someone whose back is turned. This personal space is evident in all animals and all people, although the distances vary depending on culture. In a famous study a few years ago, behavioral scientists discovered that a slight physical sensation of warmth or coldness could affect a person's judgment. They asked participants in the study to hold either a cup of hot coffee or a cup of iced tea, and then introduce them to a potential political candidate who would speak to them individually for a few minutes. In the follow-up questionnaire, they were asked if the the candidate's personality was either A, warm and friendly, or B, chilly and off-putting. And the answer depended more on the temperature the cup the participant was holding than on the identity of the candidate or what they said. This kind of study became known as priming, sending a subtle physical message to the body of the participant and asking them about something else. I think this makes us look a little bit dumb at first, like we just react to what we're holding in our hands, but these are under very controlled situations and are asking very subtle questions. But across the senses, changing the physical state of the body changes the conceptual state of the mind. In embodied cognition, a number of themes recur. One is that cognition is time-sensitive. Deadlines and other pressures create stress that affect our judgment. Another theme of embodied knowledge is that we tend to offload cognitive work onto the environment. We can't process all the information available, so we use structures to store and manage the information. Structures like calendars and lists. We do long division with a pencil and paper rather than doing it in our heads. In Scrabble, players rearrange the tiles in their hands in order to visualize the possibilities. It would be unfair if they couldn't. Moving the world around to facilitate the information is known as distributed cognition. Distributed cognition. We restructure the world to help us. In chess, a player moves one piece forward, takes a look around, changes their mind, and moves the piece back. It's very simple. Thinking with your brain and objects in the world is what people do. We aren't just tool users, we're tool thinkers. A new field of information architecture uses design and architecture principles to design interfaces, software, and information structures. Carl Fast, an information architect, says distributed cognition is effective for leveraging ideas for solving hard problems. Mr. Fast lists the steps of creating an embodied cognitive leverage. 1, better representation of information does improve cognition, in the manner of Edward Tufte. 2, however, and even more effective, is what he calls epistemic actions. Cutting, rotating, rearranging the world to reflect thought. Like moving chess pieces to see the view, but at a larger scale. These actions create structures. Obvious ones are like street signs or workshop jigs. And these structures change the world and our interaction. In other words, interaction with the world is more effective than representation for leveraging information. He does mention workshop jigs. Jigs are part of the fabrication process. They're a short-use device for holding parts in a desired orientation. Do you use 1, 2, 3 blocks when you're building models? A 1, 2, 3 block is a jig. A ruler is a jig for drawing straight lines and measuring them. Epistemic actions are characterized by small actions making small changes on the world. That change is perceived, which then affects the next idea, leading to the next action, which affects the next perception, and so on, in tiny loops of perception and action, each informing the other. The smaller the loops are, the quicker the feedback, and the more information is leveraged. Designers already think with their bodies. We regard streets and cities as orchestrated instruments for people in motion. We read the expression of the human body and its size and scale on the built environment. We want our designs to make affordances for the people there to facilitate their activities. Facilitate. We want buildings to be our friends. Juhani Pallasmaa is right. Buildings are so much more than what we see, even though as designers our vocabulary is mostly visual. Pallasmaa is a writer who heightens the reader's own sense of embodied cognition. Just as our vocabulary is visual, our practice is also abstract in some ways. The designer's way of thinking has to be abstract as much as it is visceral. By abstract, I mean in the mind, not in the world. Conceptual content is what makes architecture just as much as the physical sensation of being there. We have learned to guard ourselves from over-abstraction. The worst design result is when the presence of a building or a place is out of scale, cold, and unfriendly. We know great buildings make great photos, but the real test is the humanity of being there. The place needs to feel right. And I wonder if embodied knowledge has received its full respect. It feels like we've only scratched the surface of possibilities in the design practice to me. As designers, we learn to draw and make beautiful models, but still a lot of designing happens in our heads. Digital modeling and fabrication have increased the number of iterations and the amount of detailed information and save us time, but at the same time, computer modeling has literally removed the hand and body from many of the processes of visualization. Another drawback of computer modeling is its seductive completeness. A bad idea can look good. How do we know when it's a bad idea? Not just by visualizing it better, but by engaging with it physically. Most of us utilize experience to make that cognitive leap of being there inside the design. Experience here means remembering your body in another place. That's right, it's embodied knowledge. In time, we each build a library of experience that assists us in comparing an idea to a reality. So, as a woodworker or a craftsperson, I guess it's almost so plain I hate to say it, but craft and full-scale making are the next logical extension of design engagement. Just ask Coleman. Coleman, where are you? The best architecture firms practice making in-house as often as possible. In the field of craftsmanship and craft scholarship, I have located a few references to embodiment. Usually in school, when we talk about craft, we mean that something is well made. And craft is also, in an art historical sense, it refers to studio craft, or the craft movement. It's a parallel discipline to fine art. It's based on functionality and working with specific materials, textiles, clay, glass, wood, and metals. But I found surprisingly little about the creative process in most craft theory. What I'm trying to explain is how the wood design course works in a way that relates to design students studying craft for the first time. Years of practice with the tools and the resulting holistic oneness of mind, body, and spirit does not describe a student's experience. In his 2008 book, The Craftsman, Richard Sennett describes how the practice of craft can be a tonic for the estrangement of contemporary society. He is sociological and multidisciplinary, and he gets several things right. The individual craftsperson's relation to community and to authority, and the ongoing reproduction of skills. He describes the neuroscience of hand and brain development. Hands do indeed make us human. Sennett's knowledge of hands comes mostly from playing music, and his best material studies are clay and brick. And he offers the definition of, or restates the definition of 10,000 hours as being a benchmark of mastery. Sennett offers strategies of resistance, a bold description of the process of intuition that I don't understand, and an exposition on ambiguity. He uses the phrase embodied knowledge once, saying, quote, "Thinking like a craftsman is more than a state of mind. It has a sharp social edge." For all his interest in hands and processes, Sennett is a little bit more interested in the morals and ethics of craft. And this also has a long-running theme. You can't lie about a joint that doesn't close up. Either it's tight or it isn't. The results are unequivocal. A craftsperson, like a musician, has made a personal commitment to quality, requiring discipline and hard work. But I'm only somewhat interested in the moral qualities of craft. I don't think craftspeople have moral merits that other people don't. Sennett's most direct reference to the creative process is a quote from Renzo Piano in a book called Why Architects Draw. Piano explains his process. Quote, "You do a drawing, then you make a model, then you go to the site, then back to the drawing. You build a kind of circularity between drawing and making, and then back again, which sounds a lot like distributed cognition to me. Historically, craft theory is mostly concerned with technique or labor history. Ever since John Ruskin, craft writers have presented an ongoing critique of industrial production. A lot of recent craft practitioners blur the boundaries between craft, design, and art. And in my experience, these disciplines have enormous overlaps. And what's really interesting is when the genres intersect one another. In contrast to this cross-pollination, Howard Rosati wrote A Theory of Craft in 2007. He defines a comprehensive craft theory in total. His agenda is to legitimize the craft movement. To Rosati, craft is a completely separate practice from design and art. Art is about communication, but it's non-functional. Design is functional, but in his definition, design is mass-produced. Craft is functional and handmade, and that makes it fundamentally different. Craft exists on its own terms. And I think that's true to some extent, but Rosati's definitions are so exclusive that he changes the meaning of the word design. I mean, according to him, I haven't been practicing design for the last 20 years. I've only been doing craft, and I'm not sure that's true. The entirety of my experience is that these disciplines overlap and dovetail together. If anything, design learns from craft, and craft can certainly learn some things from design. Michael Crawford, in his 2008 book, Shop Class as Soul Craft, reverse engineers himself from being a knowledge worker to being a tradesman, which is a little more applicable to the situation of a designer who's learning making for the first time. He's also critical of the nature of work, although in this case he puts a little twist on it because he goes back to being a tradesman from being an intellectual worker. He says the trades are cognitively demanding and a lifetime of learning is required. He stresses community and individual responsibility, like Michael Polanyi. Crawford has a phrase, to be master of one's own stuff, to know what's around you. Everyday life should make sense, to reconnect the mind and the body. So, he also writes quite a bit about embodied knowledge and the neuroscience of experience. He regards the trades as partly so successful and interesting because it requires submission to a practice that is bigger than you are. It requires humility. And he defines craft as the desire to do something well for its own sake. And I kind of understand that, to do something well for its own sake, or to have a larger point of view about why you're doing something. But I think we also do things for personal reasons as well. What I really like is Crawford says that competence begets agency. Agency being the capacity to take care of oneself, to make actions effective in the world. And I think that's pretty interesting. His second book has a long discussion of jigs. Things can serve as a kind of authority to us, a way of structuring our environment. Chefs in particular arrange their tools and ingredients in a way so that they can think less when they're in the midst of time-sensitive operations. Crawford identifies some of these larger structures that Mr. Fast hints at. Administrative jigs, like health insurance and retirement savings plan. Cultural jigs, like the Protestant work ethic. And jigs for hire, such as accountants and gardeners. I disagree with his critics who see Crawford as either macho or male-centric. I think the reviewers fault his attitude, but not his actual language. More than likely, the critics aren't familiar with fabrication. Women are as good as men at woodworking, and gender makes no difference. As a furniture designer, seeking avenues for expression, I see how distributed cognition could unleash several chapters of design investigations. What else is furniture doing other than offloading some of our physical work onto the environment? Chairs take the weight off our legs and back while keeping our heads upright. Tables lift the work area to a comfortable height and provide social arrangement of space, much like this table is doing right now. Case goods keep our possessions safe, and they allow us to clear and organize the tabletop. In effect, all furniture is interactive, and it reshapes the world in our shape. As a craftsperson, I can assure you that embodied knowledge is exactly how craft dexterity operates. So I will describe the wood design class. The foundation of this course is do it yourself. This is a hands-on, full-scale 3D design class. At whatever skill level you work, you practice making things to get good at it. And you must learn the material and the tools to be effective. I cannot tell you how to sharpen a chisel, but I can show you. Sharpening a chisel, you must pay close attention to the surface of the steel. You must learn the physics of the grinding wheel and the honing stones. You must hold on to the tools, move your hands, and move your entire body. As you hone the surface, you need to look at what you did and see what your actions resulted in. If the chisel surface is only honed on the left side, you need to adjust your grip and you need to add more pressure to the right side. Here comes those quick feedback loops of action perception, action perception. This is clinical distributed cognition. You have to interact with the chisel's world and it with yours. The tool's edge will not become sharp by luck or chance. There are some accurate visual signs to assess its sharpness, but what really matters, does it cut? And if it does, then it's sharp. We haven't even talked about lumber yet. Woodworking knowledge is free and open sourced. My role is to demystify everything, to explain what I think are the fundamental skills as a designer would think about them. I teach joinery, actively putting pieces of wood into mechanical attachment. We use hand tools and power tools because both are versatile and necessary. The point is to leverage effectiveness, to leverage engagement. Listening to the course without doing the exercises would be futile. Sharpening the tool is one step in a series of embodiments. We discussed the cellular structure of wood. The wood grain is defined as the structural orientation of the wood cells parallel to the trunk of the tree. This grain, this arrangement of cells, gives wood enormous longitudinal strength, but some complications going across the grain, also known as end grain. Wood also shrinks and swells parallel to its annual rings with changes in humidity. Wood is a fully embodied material. It was once, in fact, alive. Wood sometimes has tension stored inside because the tree lived with stress. When a straight board is cut in half longitudinally, sometimes the halves bend away from each other. It's literally tension inside of the wood. Students apply the chisel to the wood and learn that chiseling end grain is completely different from chiseling longitudinal grain. Long grain has another distinct direction if it's sliced at a slight angle. One direction is known as with the grain, and another is against the grain. Cutting with the grain is smooth and clean. Cutting against is ragged, and the wood fibers tear out of the surface. Going against the grain doesn't feel good. Even going with the grain, wood species act differently from one another. Chiseling pine is a nightmare, but chiseling cherry wood is a dream. The back of the chisel being flat also acts as a small jig that registers to another straight line and allows you to continue it. The one craft theorist I have no problems with is David Pye, who is a teacher at the Royal College of Art. In The Nature and Art of Workmanship, Pye sets the parameters for craft discussion. He defines craftsmanship as the exercise of judgment, dexterity, and care in the practice of making. Judgment is something that as designers we can relate to. We want to make smart choices. Dexterity, that's definitely in the realm of making things. And care is something that everybody can practice. He even says that care is the most important of these characteristics. And what I take away from that is that if you're learning a craft or a trade and you care about the results, then craft is definitely possible for you. He makes a distinction between the craftsmanship of risk, meaning hand-eye determination of the toolpath, and the craftsmanship of certainty, where machines or jigs determine the action. These two qualities overlap a lot, and almost every technique has some elements of both. A hand plane has a flat sole, and it always seeks to make a flat surface. It's the nature of how it works. It's self-jigging. Pai also defines quality and what he calls regulated craftsmanship or precise craftsmanship. But he also states the quality of craftsmanship is judged in relation to the designer's intention. In most circumstances, precision is the metric of quality, but precision and roughness only make sense in the context of the intended design. Rembrandt's sketches are rough, but you can't say that they're not intentional. They're meant to be that way. And this is a two-way street. Quote, moreover, the intended design will have to be conceived in terms of the kind of workmanship and the degree of regulation which is suited to the product. A truly successful design must include a discussion of its execution and its finished qualities. Pai has an entire chapter he calls Diversity, which is about reading design and a series of different scales from far away to up close. And he has some nice illustrations of some of these very, very up close manifestations. During the first half of the wood design semester, students perform short technical exercises, repeating the process demonstrated in class. There are also brief design build assignments and 2 reviews for the final projects. The second half of the semester, students fabricate the final project. That's about 7 weeks. A single piece of furniture. We discuss program, the functional requirements of the piece. A chair, for instance, is not a generic type, but a particular chair. It has a vibe and it has an aspect on horizontality. The more specifically the design is programmed, the better. There is no digital fabrication allowed on any assignment, but computer renderings and models are allowed. This is not a digital studio, and I don't teach CNC. There are just too many hand tools to learn. There's too much to learn to get to that. And any good CNC practitioner needs a background in fundamental embodied construction, which only adds to the power that the CNC can leverage for them. Wood design teaches beginning woodworking skills to advanced architecture and design students. The already developed design skills these students possess are part of the foundation of this class. Visualization skills, drawing, modeling, mental imaging, mapping, translate directly to the fabrication process. Partly just reading the drawings to make them 3D, but also understanding the path the tool makes in space, visualizing how to build a jig to hold a piece, and how the cutting direction of the blade intersects the grain direction of the wood. You have to see into the thickness of the wood to know what the grain direction is. You have to visualize that. In the culture of the School of Architecture, students learn design as a process that requires effectively asking questions and not being satisfied with easy answers. Design here is investigative and iterative. Our visualizations and drawings are not just our products. Our visualizations are our tools for thinking. And of course, this is one of the principles of embodied cognition. That information must be made physical in order to organize it and engage with it better. Design is a discussion, an ongoing conversation. When we design a building or a piece of furniture, we have to provide answers, how wide, how tall. But what makes design worthwhile and interesting is that the questions were asked along the way. Students arrive in wood design with these values. Architectural design assignments are usually unsolvable problems. Instructors layer restrictions or obstructions, as Lars von Trier calls them, upon the assignment. These restrictions generate ideas and decisions. Design is a synthesis and meshing of several goals into a visual idea. In wood design, the obstructions are the program of the furniture and the relative strength of lumber. That's why I say this is a material-driven class. The limits of the material, the parameters of grain strength, are a huge obstruction. I do not assign a program for the final project. Since the student keeps the furniture, they select the program. And this also leverages their engagement. At UTSOA, we don't talk about intuition and creativity directly, but we definitely cultivate them through our methods of idea generation and ordering systems, which actually free the mind to wander a little bit. We look at history analytically to see the ideas and techniques that have been used before, but also for inspiration, motivation, personal connection to your own psychic embodied library. Wood design looks at furniture design history for the same reasons. The best examples of wood furniture show that the designer had a dynamic understanding of how grain direction affects shapes and connections. These history images also show students the achievements of the imagination. This balancing act between questions and answers is paralleled in the process of making. The maker-designer balances between visual ideas and their embodied knowledge of woodworking. Leora Vysotsky wrote in My Rocking Thesis, when a craftsman designs something, he goes through the process of workmanship in his mind, and when he is working, he redesigns parts and ideas as he goes along. This is inevitable, and it is the back and forth between making and thinking and making that is craftsmanship. So here's a few issues that come up. One is that because of wood movement and grain strength, wood used as a structure has a correct appearance, just like Zhening Zhang's credenza behind me. Solid wood construction looks like solid wood furniture. Veneered or plywood furniture is recognizably different from that or from any other material. Another theme is the natural beauty of wood. And this is a kind of an emotional topic. I guess just go back to the last one. The whole idea of rough versus smooth or precise versus loose. Sometimes as a craftsperson you are enamored of the grain and the figure of a particular piece of material. But as a designer, you still need to design, not just let the wood speak. There's also, John Blood once mentioned to me that precision in craftsmanship sometimes eliminates the traces of the craftsperson's process. And he's interested in designs that also show a little more roughness of that process, that precision alone just isn't the only metric or expression for woodworking. I've only got a couple more here. Cutting wood in non-orthogonal directions reveals the true three-dimensionality of the wood grain. Wood has the potential to be carved, curved, and sculpted in 3D, and when it is, it reveals its inner structure. Wood grain and annual rings wrap around the surface of the curvature, one layer of information upon another. Manipulating the grain is part of the craft. Precision craft makes joinery that is seamless. The material looks continuous across the joint. That's the test of woodworking skill, is making something look tight and seamless. Architectural design has a tendency to express the joint, the tectonics of the construction, like Shenning's project behind me. Architectural design has a tendency to express the joint. In materials theory, designing a reveal in the joint is appropriate and even necessary where there's a change in materials, where two materials have different rates of movement. But often the vocabulary of reveal, steps, and separations is expressed in a single material as well. Another issue, design the imprint of human bodies on the furniture. You should be able to see and feel where the furniture is going to be touched. Handles, profiled edges, doors and drawers, and most importantly, chairs. Any student in the class making a chair must also build a full-scale version of the seating surface and any part of the design that touches the body to study the actual comfort in an embodied sense. Furniture, like clothing, is often a statement of how we identify ourselves. Most designers like to be known as being inventive and investigating. Design is a language, and the values that we speak, we understand together. To a surprising degree, though, choices of furniture, design, and representation also reflect our personal values and our self-image. Students feel comfortable with certain kinds of representation. And more than one student has discussed the final project design as a self-portrait, a symbolic representation of his or her body. How far does craft go? How much is the bottom finished? There are reasons based on needing to have balanced panels that we did put finish on the bottom, but there are also part of this discussion based on the time available and the priorities. But one thing I noticed looking at George Nakashima's chairs is that they aren't sanded on the bottom. There's actual planer marks on the bottom. And where the spindle of the leg has been glued in, there's a tiny little bead of glue all the way around the leg. And I think what Nakashima's studio is saying is that there's just the right amount of glue here. There's enough that it's not too dry, but there's not so much that we didn't have to wipe the glue off. So he's, on the one hand, prioritizing what parts of the furniture need the higher levels of finish, and he's also still showing you, even on the bottom, that they're doing their job right. What I'm trying to answer is, how did all these students achieve so much? And in my experience, embodied cognition asks as many questions as it answers. That's it. And I hope we have some questions.
Please let's not break until 1 o'clock, because it just disturbs the vibe. Go ahead, John.
I have a question. That's an amazing body of work. And one thing that I'll start with a comment, I got to a question. One thing I was struck by was the photographs of the stereo console with the iPod in it, and how stupid the iPod looks, but how wonderful the console has held up in terms of its appearance. I think that speaks to the importance of your course in a certain level, as far as I'm concerned. There were a couple things that came up. It's just like a two-part question. One is, you felt compelled to mention that creativity and intuition is talked about explicitly at the school. Mm-hmm. So I was curious, that seems to suggest you have an opinion about that. I'd be curious to know what that opinion is.
Well, I think we all work with intuition and imagination and ideas. And we think of ideas as being a fairly rational process. But I'm not sure where ideas come from and how they're generated. And I think that we still have to teach students how to basically be themselves and think intuitively, and that's partly where ideas come from. But I think that we do, in effect, wind up teaching creativity. We just don't like talking about it in terms that aren't somehow based in a rational process.
And the other question was, considering the nature of your course, I was a little surprised to hear that the mind-body subject is a big part of what you see as what the course covers. Because I've heard in the past there have been conversations that I've encountered where that very division has been a justification for artwork, for example, that where, shall we say, the issue of craft is not really heavily invested in.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one slide where you show some study models. One of the students, I assume it's early studies of a chair.
Yes.
You know which one I'm talking about?
I do.
And so I was curious if it seems like it's a little dangerous to introduce that topic in a course like this one, where you're heavily invested in doing things by hand and being kind of interested in conversations about the beauty of natural materials. I was wondering if you had some anecdotes to share about whether or not introducing that topic's like essentially became a red herring or a bit explosive in terms of what you were hoping to accomplish, pedagogically speaking. Like, if
I'm not sure what the danger is, I guess.
well, yeah, and so maybe I'm revealing maybe a shortcoming on my part to understand how the conversation about the difference between the mind-body, how the mind-body division conversation dovetails with a conversation that is focused on craft. When in the past, or at least some of the things that I've encountered with respect to art, is it's often art that is conceptually invested.
Mind wins.
Well,
No?
as a competition, I don't know. Like I was just curious to know, like maybe if there have been times in the past where a student's work essentially diverts from the agenda of craft is in pursuit of just the mind body thing that you were talking about.
In pursuit of abstraction?
I guess that's
In
what it boils
pursuit
down to
of
at a certain level.
abstractual. Well, I mean, I am kind of interested in conceptual design and conceptual art, which is usually where there's like basically a set of instructions that become the artwork. But I don't. I mean, I don't think that we're shortchanging the mind by discussing embodied cognition. I don't think we're shortchanging still the need for abstraction and conceptualizing things. Is that the potential danger? I'm still, I guess, trying to sort it out a little bit.
Well, just it's not, maybe, and forgive me, I didn't mean to characterize it as danger. It's just as much as a digression, because I thought the course you said sounds very ambitious and seems appropriate and well balanced. I just wondered if there were times whenever the studies became so abstract that you felt like anecdotally, if
like
there were moments where
a student would want to do art, and you'd have to say this is just art.
Maybe it's just their architectural training, but I think the students like to see that they have that they also have an embodied relation to it, even though it's conceptual. I really want to help you with this, John.
Okay.
maybe we'll let it go now.
Well, you know what? We do continue this after
It was a bad
1
question,
o'clock.
perhaps.
No, it's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's a good question.
But we're going to
I'm
pursue
trying
it
to understand.
a little later. Let's just try to open it for some more.
I have a really easy
Anybody?
question.
Oh, good.
I doubt it.
Teaching this class next semester or in the fall?
So far, I've taught it every fall and spring.
Okay.
Yes. So yes, I think it will be
That was an easy
offered
question.
again.
For what it's worth, I think some students have figured out a way to do it a semester when they have a lighter load in studio. If that ever happens.
Yeah,
Good.
very advisable.
Are there like any requirements, any prerequisites, or?
No, I think you have to have 2 years of design.
Okay.
Yeah.
Am I understanding correctly that you think that intuitive design is inherently irrational? And if so, what does that mean for design?
No, I'm not sure I believe that intuitive design is irrational. I think I'm promoting intuition and trying to cultivate it. And I'm saying that what we learn from our body actually is a jumping off point for our mind to work with. So I have no problem with intuition or abstraction. I'm hoping to make more of it in the long run. Yeah, Kevin.
So this is a question asking you to speculate. So I think part of your talk is suggesting that conceptual design, intuitive design is something that one cultivates through the making of things. Right?
Yes.
That
Yes.
embodied cognition is very much not just an intellectual pursuit, but it is combined with a physical pursuit.
Please, yes.
It makes perfect sense to do that in something that you can control entirely. And I know you've made a career out of making things like that. I wonder if you have any thoughts about how you translate that kind of knowledge and kind of cultivation of a conceptual idea when things leave the realm of something like a piece of furniture, like a building, for example. How do you take that way of conceiving of something into the design of something much larger than you can do yourself?
Well, I shy away from architecture to some extent because I feel engaged by furniture design, and because I shy away from the responsibility of representing buildings. I think it's a huge responsibility. So I think that might be for someone else to figure out how to combine those two things. But I mean,
Do you think it's translatable?
I absolutely think it's translatable, and I think that like the firms that work in model in 3D most often, they are using embodied knowledge to help further their own conceptual pursuits. On a bigger scale, I think it can get very complex for sure. Do you have an example, maybe?
Yeah, the career of Carlos Scarpa. He was raised in a craft. He thought like a craftsman. He hung out with craftsmen. He built very little, really, for an entire career, because for him, a building was a large piece of furniture. I mean, and it's just, his buildings just radiate with that sensibility. And I think if an architect wants to practice like that, you've got to build a career that looks more or less like his does.
See, but I love Scarpa's work, but there is a craftsman sensibility to every aspect of it.
Yeah.
And it is like one big piece of furniture. And I do think there's a difference between furniture and buildings. You can build a building like a piece of furniture, you can build a piece of furniture like a building. Bad furniture. But I guess my thought is, I totally buy into the thought of embodied cognition. I think this thought that somehow conceptual design is something you intellectually come up with and then you put it out there in the world is a sort of short-circuiting that very important part of design. And I think it's the architect's paradox, isn't it, that we want to learn from making, we want to learn from doing things with our body and working on something, but we're always working in the realm of representation and not the actual thing.
Well, not always. I guess is what we're saying, that we also use these structures to take our ideas and basically make them tangible. That's one of the things that architects are good at, is taking ideas and making them visible and tangible so that other people can understand them. So I think we do that. I just think, if we can do that more, it would be even better. That's the one.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, more questions?
I've got one more
Because you don't want to get me started.
over here.
Yes.
So the idea of embodied cognition and also how it relates to the process of craft you describe is feedback loop of action, perception.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that relates to the idea of digital fabrication? And so the idea of using digital tools as a natural progression of the field of craft. Largely you think about the standard hallmark tools of a woodworker or a fabricator, and it's table saw, planer joiner, and chisels, and these are anything but new tools. How do you take new tools and engage them in a meaningful way into the idea of craft and embodied cognition?
Well, I think that you need both. You need digital tools and you need traditional analog tools. I think that designs that have been developed digitally and then are fabricated only digitally read as being a little one-dimensional. And Corey Olson did his thesis project last spring about basically trying to overlap as many different processes into a single piece as he could, because he was trying to add to that richness of experience, basically. So my answer is that really, for me, you need both. I think digital tooling is fantastic for what it does, but you also, like I hope I was saying, is that you want that background and that experience with fabricating in the older sense of it.
Yeah.
And the two of them would work together.
So you're saying like the natural progression is not to transition from one to the other, but instead look at them as a merger.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Creating the same little feedback loops of idea and perception, but doing it in multiple media. Basically, you have to represent things in more than one media, without a doubt.
Yeah.
And the fabrication part always reads as more rich, more detailed, more diverse if there are multiple media being involved as well.
How much of this do you think has to do with time? Just inevitably with the amount of time spent on things.
I mean, craft is often called sort of a slow process, kind of like slow food.
Yeah.
Basically, you have to go at the time that it takes it to happen to some extent. Embodied cognition is time sensitive. Time is a real factor. I mean, it feels like it works to your disadvantage, but I'm not sure if it works to your disadvantage or not. I think it's just time-wise, yeah, you have to be there. You definitely have to spend the time.
Billy Chen and Todd Williams wrote a piece called, I think, Slow Architecture.
Slowness.
Slowness.
That's right. I love that essay. I saw a question.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I was curious, your students produce those pieces of furniture in one semester?
In one semester,
Wow,
in 7 weeks.
that's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah, but he has really good students.
That's what I'm saying. Also, I think the school has this class is an offshoot of everything the school already does, and that I do have really great students, and most of them are here now. And I congratulate all of y'all for taking the chance to do this and for checking this out.
I have a follow-up. Can I see some pieces? I mean, are they on display?
They've all fallen apart.
What?
He said they've all fallen apart.
You took them home?
They took them home. Yeah, they took them all home.
Come to the final review.
You guys
So-
should have a display, like a museum display.
Well, you know, they made this stuff for themselves, and they kind of want it.
Okay.
Come to the final review for his
I
class.
think you're lucky to have this many photographs. I'm going to say thank you to Mark, and please stick around for more discussion, at least 15 more minutes.